Should you play Devil May Cry 4 in 2024? Well, coming off of Devil May Cry 3, which many deem as the hardest game in the series, I was excited to move on to the next game in the franchise. Going into this, I had zero expectations, but considering this was the first DMC game to be on PlayStation 3, I was definitely intrigued. Releasing 16 years ago in 2008, this was a game that I missed out on during that generation that I hear is pretty good. Nonetheless, let's break this game down and see if it's worth at least one playthrough.
Got a jacked up notion of fair play, pal. And it's beginning to piss me off.
Fundamentally, DMC4 has the same gameplay as the past games, with you playing from a third-person perspective in a variety of areas killing a bunch of creatures. Where this game differs is in its structure, as you can play as both Nero and Dante. Before starting the game, you can check the menu and see that the main story has two playable characters, making it known up front who's available to use. If you play DMC2, then you might think it's similar to this, but it's really not, which I think is a good thing. In that game, there were two main characters, Dante and Lucia, but in order to get a full understanding of the story, you had to complete a full playthrough with both. However, in this game, you play as Nero for about half the story and then switch over to Dante for the second half. I thought this was a great way to keep the gameplay engaging because each of them plays different, and by the time you reach Dante's section, it feels like home. Movement wise, both players feel the same, but when playing as Nero, he has a devil arm that can grab enemies from reasonable distances. Honestly, this move is OP, and you can snatch pretty much anything once you upgrade the ability enough. Press the grab button twice and you'll be throwing or smashing demons with ease. On the other hand, Dante plays just as he has the entire series, but the small changes in this title make all the difference. Most notably, the ability to switch styles is a mechanic that should have been in the game sooner, but was finally implemented in this title. Previously, you had to go into the menu before the start of each mission and choose a style that you wanted, with the game forcing you to keep that style until you reach a divinity statue where you could change it. Being able to switch styles in the middle of combat gives you the ability to adapt on the fly and to adjust to the different attacks that the enemies throw at you. Just like Nero, you have the option to purchase abilities and unlock new moves for your weapons or styles. Find a way to implement these into the combat and your version of Dante will be lethal to say the least. Shout out to Link Sergio Belmont, who commented on my DMC3 review, letting me know that in the Nintendo Switch version of that game, there's a freestyle mode that allows you to switch styles, devil arms, and firearms all on the fly. Even though it was included in the Switch version, it wasn't in the original DMC3, so I'm glad that you could do all of that in DMC4. Sometimes the smallest gameplay tweaks can make all the difference. What makes this combat better than the previous games is that memorizing the different moves with each character led to devastating combos that actually made a difference during each fight. Of course, you've always had the ability to combine different moves to create a combo, but this game takes it up a notch. Understanding which moves to perform and when to perform them can be the reason why you live or the reason why you die. You can mash the attack button constantly, but eventually that's not going to work, as the enemies get harder and defend a lot more than you might expect. To put it simply, if you combine your basic attacks with the guns and air launchers, the combos you create are going to be insane. One thing I didn't like about this game was the way some of the missions were structured. There's multiple times where you have to solve a puzzle to get across an area, and if you fail, you drop down all the way to a place where you're forced to kill a handful of enemies. Normally this isn't a big deal, but if you fail multiple times, you have to fight the demons over and over again, which I thought was completely unnecessary. The devs could have just made us fall down and then climb back up, but that's just me. Also, some of the puzzles could have been better or just scrapped altogether. A great example is later on in the game you have to roll a dice to get across a room. I won't explain how it works, but why would anybody think this is fun? I admire the creativity, but let's just keep it like all the other rooms and have us kill enemies in order to progress. It's one of those situations where some ideas look better on paper than when they're actually made a reality. Either way, it's not a deal breaker, just a slight annoyance. Now, I played the special edition of the game on PS5, which gives you a whole bunch of orbs and additional costumes, which I thought was pretty cool. So when I used Dante and Nero, I chose to wear the alternate costumes, and to my surprise, I had unlimited Devil Trigger when wearing them. I had absolutely no idea that this was even possible. I thought it was purely cosmetic, but if you end up playing the special edition of the game yourself, be sure to equip one of the other costumes so you can have this benefit for your playthrough. Regarding the difficulty, I played on normal and it wasn't nearly as hard as 3 was. Even without the bonus orbs and proud souls, it still would have been pretty easy. The enemies don't deal too much damage and the checkpoints during each mission are pretty forgiving, on the off chance that you do end up struggling in a certain section. Something worth mentioning is that the fights aren't in very small areas like the previous games either. You still travel from place to place with the entryways being blocked off sometimes, but each room always has enough space to operate. Jumping, executing attacks, and dodging can all be done with room to spare, keeping the flow of the combat at a nice pace. Unless they change with an increase in difficulty, the enemies don't get in your way as you're performing the movements either, as they go through their own attack pattern, but it's not directly in front of your face. I don't know about you, but there was no way I was playing any of those super hard difficulties that would make this game infuriating. There's a whole bunch of options to choose from too, so if you do want to challenge yourself, the devs give you that choice. I mentioned a bit ago that I played the special edition of the game, but what I didn't tell you was that Virgil, Trish, and Lady are all playable characters in that version. Personally, I didn't play with them much, but I did try them out briefly, and they're pretty fun to use. I liked how they weren't just skins, but they actually played how they should, with unique moves and abilities between them. For example, when using Lady, you can spam her rocket launcher, which is a slow yet powerful attack. Just this attack alone gives her a unique feel compared to the rest of the characters. What I thought didn't matter as much as before was the guns. When playing with Dante, there wasn't one that I gravitated to more than the others, but instead it was more of what was best for the situation. It didn't matter if you used the pistols, shotguns, or something else, which weapon you chose was on a case-by-case basis. Once you get far enough into the game, you'll understand which situation fits each weapon, and then you can implement that into the overall gameplay. Side note, you can alternate between guns and swords by pressing L2 and R2, making it easy to switch weapons in real time. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the boss fights. In my opinion, the boss fights in this game are the best in the franchise up to this point. The combination of variety, locations, and attacks make each one memorable for their own reasons. You probably already guessed this, but yes, you fight most of the same bosses as both Nero and Dante, making each encounter feel the same, but different. Again, the fights are in large arena type locations and give you plenty of room to download the boss until you're ready to strike. Using the deadly combos on these bosses is very satisfying as you can stun them and then just go ham. On a harder difficulty, you're going to have to be more careful, as if you don't pay attention, you might die pretty fast. Just be sure to stock up on vital stars and holy waters and you'll be good. Overall, the gameplay for DMC4 is the best in the franchise for its time and is the main reason why anybody would want to return for multiple playthroughs. If you played the story for any other DMC game, then you know that these are fun, playful, and not to be taken too seriously, and this title continues that trend. Set in the fictional city of Fortuna, you follow Nero and Dante as they attempt to stop a priest with demonic powers. What shocked me the most about this plot was the amount of cutscenes that were used to tell the story. Just like before, the story is spread out between the missions, but this game gives you plenty of scenes that explain the plot. You know right from the beginning that this is the first in the franchise to have more scenes, as the prologue is a lot longer than you would expect. I actually found myself sitting there like, holy crap, this is still the intro? Don't get me wrong, I loved how many cutscenes were in the game because it helped me understand exactly what was going on and why it was happening. Without the additional context, some of the moments may have felt out of place. One critique that I've always had in DMC games is the lack of characters. Starting from the first game, the cast has always been small, but the inclusion of all the characters was never there. It felt as if they were all segmented instead of being present in the same place. Thankfully, this game fixes that as all the characters involved interact with each other at different moments, creating a feel of connectivity that wasn't present before. In regards to the setting, the city wasn't anything new, but it makes sense considering who the main villain was. For the first time, this game actually had NPCs that were included in the story. Throughout this entire series, there was nobody else except our heroes and the villains. It felt as if everything that takes place is sectioned off from the rest of the world, even though the dialogue makes it known that the world will have consequences if they don't save the day. The game still had some of the trippy, mind-bending stuff you would expect to see in DMC, but it was toned down a little bit as a lot of the game takes place within or nearby areas surrounding the city. Speaking of nearby areas, I thought the plot did a good job at making the switch in location feel natural. Too many times in games we go to another place just because it's the next level. This game has everything fit inside that specific area, having it all make sense. The bosses, characters, and story bits all take place within those places, never bringing up the question if it was worth coming here in the first place. I mentioned earlier about Virgil, Lady, and Trish being playable, but what I didn't say is that they have different opening and ending cutscenes compared to Nero and Dante. In my opinion, it's not enough to warrant 2 extra playthroughs just to see those cutscenes, but if you really like this game, go ahead. If you want to see what's in those moments, just watch them online. It'll save you a lot of time. The story for DMC4 is in line with the previous games, but does a better job at including more characters and slowly implementing them into the plot. In regards to the story, this game does a solid job at keeping you entertained just enough while staying true to what DMC is at its core. So should you play Devil May Cry 4 in 2024? That answer would be a definite yes. Overall, the game is just fun to play. The quality of life changes from the previous games all make a huge difference in the gameplay, and the story is explained better than it ever has been. The additional cutscenes make going through each level worth it and align with the other games that released during that generation. If I had to give it a rating, I would say this game is a solid 8.5. This game is better than the previous 3 games, and if you play the special edition, you get additional content that may entice you to run through this title multiple times. If you're on the fence about getting this, don't be, because if you like fast-paced hack and slash games, this is right up your alley. What did you think about Devil May Cry 4? Have you played this before, or are you just hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Okay then, a museum. So what?
Well, what if their intentions are foul? And there's a diabolical plan behind these apparently random acts?
Well then, I'd have something to keep me occupied, and... Trish!